Hello, BookTube. And this is a little change of gears to your daily SF magazine. I'd started a series just showing magazines and talking a little bit about the stories that are in them, or at least the authors, and then sort of gave a few tidbits of the history. And I thought, well, let's revamp that and do it from sort of a chronological history for each magazine from the beginning, and then a few tidbits from the period that the magazine I'm holding up is from. That is taking a little more time, so I'm not going to be doing it on a daily basis anymore. I haven't decided exactly how many episodes of that I'll do per week. However, out of that, I realize that there's going to be a lot of topics that I want to talk a little more in depth about. Not deeply, but just a little more in depth. And there's three topics here that are to do with some female editors or slash assistant editors. One for Astounding, one for Amazing, and one for Galaxy science fiction. That, for the most part, have been overlooked, I think. Especially this first one that I'm going to do for Astounding, Catherine Tennant. I think she's been overlooked big time, and there's very little information. There's books that are written that are all about Astounding, and she doesn't even get a mention in. And about Golden Age science fiction, she rarely gets a mention in, or just a brief mention. And if you look at the Wikipedia page for Astounding slash Analog, its history, it's a pretty good page, but she's only mentioned once and very briefly. And when you look at the Campbell page, she's not. I don't think she's mentioned at all there, and she definitely doesn't have a page of her own, which she should. And there's very little information anywhere else, and it's just repeated information, the same information a lot of times, and out of context and not put into context. So I thought I would do as much as I can of information that I've pieced together about her. It's not exhaustive by any means, but let's get started. As I say, Catherine Tennant, and it's Catherine with a C, and I'll explain why I say that as we go along. Now, she was born in Hoboken, New Jersey, 1905 or 1906. I'm not sure. I'm definitely not sure the date, and I know it's one or the other year, and I'll explain as we go along why that is. Now, we go now fast forward to 1937 in October. John W. Campbell gets a job with Street and Smith as editor of Astounding Stories, and he began when F. Orland Tremaine was still editor, and the sub-editor was there at the same time a little bit as well, called his name was Richard V. Happel, or Hapley. I'm not sure the pronunciation. But he left. They both left at around that time, October, November, December 1937. Campbell was de facto the editor. However, it wasn't until well into 1938 that issues started coming out that had his brand on and his take on and his choice of stories, because Tremaine left a number of stories that would keep going for a few months. But also at the time when things were gearing up and getting to his liking, Catherine Tennant started working at Street and Smith and at Astounding specifically. Now, I don't know her exact role. I don't know exactly when she started. The information is from Barry M. Maltzberg's a collection of essays that he wrote, saying that she started earlier, mid 1938. She was in her early 30s at that point, and Robert Silverberg, in an email to the author Alec Navala Lee, in this book, he describes more or less Catherine Tennant. And she's nondescript, a Roman Catholic, a devout Roman Catholic from Hoboken. Uh, in many ways, sort of quite kind of prudish. Uh, that's Robert Silverberg's take on her. Now, and this email was from 2016. Robert Silverberg was born in 1935, wrote tons of science. He's still alive, writing nonfiction, and under the pseudonym of Don Elliott, he wrote basically hardcore erotica for a while. Now, John W. Campbell had for years described Miss Tennant as or just Tennant. He would call her Miss Tennant or just Tennant, and she always called him Campbell. He described her as his secretary, and we see in Isaac Asimov's memoirs that he goes to the offices for the first time, and he speaks to his secretary. At that point, he doesn't say who it is. It's a very good chance it was Miss Tennant. But he does mention her specifically, coming in at in Memory Yet Green, the first volume of his memoirs, of meeting her in 1941, and it's early January 1941, and he describes her as Catherine Tennant with a K. Now again, this is Isaac Asimov's faulty memory, I think, but also too she was known as K as well. And so that is kind of understandable, but I believe it was actually Catherine, because I'll explain a little later why. And now he goes in, like he wrote a story called Liar, Isaac Asimov did, and he had the robo-psychologist named Caldwell, and it was after a Professor Caldwell that he had at university. And he got cold feet thinking that he shouldn't, he wanted to be sort of a homage to her, but he didn't want to sort of get in trouble. So he rushed to the offices of Astounding. John W. Campbell was not there, but Miss Tennant was. And he explained the situation to her, that he didn't want to do this. And he quotes from, and this is sort of a made-up conversation from his memory. And I'll quote from the memoir. She said with a sigh, "I suppose you want me to go through the manuscript and change the name wherever it appears." "Yes," I said eagerly. "Would you?" "What name do you want instead?" And desperately I thought of a change that would involve the fewest letters. "Calvin," I said. So then was born Susan Calvin, the robo-psychologist, in Liar. Now, and then he also he has many other references to her in the memoirs, but there's another good one here. Again, this is from his memory, and this is how he's put words into Miss Tennant's mouth, but I'm sure there's some basis to this, or there's a good chance. And this is, he says, Catherine, with a K again, whom I invariably called Miss Tarrant in those days and for years afterwards, was usually in the office when I talked to Campbell, sitting quietly and almost unnoticeably in the background, but not missing a thing. Years afterwards, she would enjoy herself by describing those early years to younger writers. Invariably, she would tell them in detail how I sat there adoring adoration of Campbell, drinking in every word he said. Now, and there are other snippets in other places, other writers talking about that she was always present in the room. And so we know from 1941 she was there. She was there. And it sounds like she began to do, by that time, more than just secretarial work, because she's, according to Asimov, changed the name. So she was doing editing work, copy work, proofreading, or whatever it happens to be. And then, as I say, Campbell was out of the office, so therefore she was the one that he would speak to. So, as I say, if she started purely as a secretary in 1938, she quickly moved to this in 1941, or well, fairly quickly in a couple of years. But she might have started right from the beginning. I have no idea what her background is. She might have started immediately to do editorial work. I don't know, and I can't find that information anywhere. It's not mentioned anywhere that I can locate. But anyway, in the March 1949 issue of Astounding, she was noted as assistant editor, Catherine Tennant, with a C. So that's why I say I think her name was Catherine with a C. But by then, obviously, she'd been doing editorial work. I think it's pretty clear that it's pretty clear. Like since 1941, even though Campbell would still refer to her as his secretary throughout those years, and like she said at one time, there's a I don't know where it's from. Just trying to find here where my reference is. She referred to Campbell as an oversight boy that could not get the magazine out on his own. So I don't know. I don't think that was a snide remark against Campbell, but it just, it does show that she had a big hand in doing this. So she clearly did all the copy, worked on the copy, the administration, the proofreading, all the administrative roles. Then that freed up Campbell to think of stories and work with authors and not deal with all this other stuff. That she did the drudge work in a sense, but very important work to get the magazine out. So Campbell in some ways has been called not really an editor but a mentor, and she did all the work, but in the end it was him that was giving the ideas, feeding the ideas to the authors and getting it back, and then she had the final product and she worked it to get it into the magazine. Now, and also there in letters from John W. Campbell, there's 2 volumes that have been published, and there's one of them. There's a letter from Isaac Asimov directly to Catherine Tennant, and this time with a C. So he got it correct then. He knew that her name was a C, but for some reason, when he wrote his memoir, his memory had failed. His memory has failed, if I said that right. But it's a letter dated August 2nd, 1958, and it starts as I say, Dear Catherine, and it's basically a letter with regards to his short story, Mother Earth, that he wants to get that anthologized, so he needs a letter from basically, I guess, Street and Smith to say that he owns the copyright so he can pass it on. Campbell replied to this saying it's in the works. So she didn't reply, or, see, this is the thing, did she reply, but it was Campbell that just signed the letter. That's another thing that I think probably happened. It happened a lot. And yeah, he would continually call her his secretary for some reason. But yeah, she was doing all the administration, and she copy editor. That's the word I was trying to think of. She was copy editor, and Campbell always called her Miss Tarrant, and she or Tarrant, and she called him Campbell, and it was a professional relationship. Apparently, he never ever took her out even for lunch, and she had a reputation for being dull and didn't want profanity, and that she would cut out any profanity in stories. Now, I think that was partially she did as far as it goes, but Campbell didn't want that kind of stuff in there anyway, and so he put the blame on her, the onus on her, and so the authors wouldn't complain about that as much probably. But there was going around sort of, trying to get words in and things like that to past her, but it never really happened except possibly one time. Now I'm moving to a biography here of Robert Heinlein, and there's a section in here that or just a paragraph. It says Katie Tarrant, and they call her Katie in here for some reason. John Campbell's very Catholic editorial assistant, already thought he was, and that's Robert Heinlein, bad clear through. And that's been quoted, but there's a note of where this has come from. And the note is from the author of this. Virginia Heinlein taped the interview with the author, March 2000. The context of the remark is that Miss Tarrant was notorious for blue penciling any writing that was even faintly suggestive. She is said to have remarked once, however, that she could not edit Heinlein because he had native tinge of heresy and his writing was bad clear through. The Heinleins treasured this remark. Other writers tried to sneak off-color remarks through her defenses, the prize of which passed around the small community of science fiction writers was a reference to a male cat as a, quote, ball-bearing mousetrap, unquote. The story was Rat Race by George O. Smith, published in Astounding in August 1947. Now, and she was also, and part of, I think, the description by Robert Silverberg says she had a salty sense of humor as well, but she did not want this in the stories, and nor did Campbell. And there is a anecdote again in the Astounding by Alec Novella Lee that goes to a discussion with authors in probably 70 or 1969 or 70. Basically, it's saying I don't give a F expletive of what you write, but we have teenagers reading the magazine to the most part. I was just trying to find the quote and see who that's from. And I can't see it here, but anyway, so she, according to that, and this was a conversation or a letter or email to Alec Novella Lee of this author being there and hearing her telling that. So she was part of that, but it was really Campbell's sort of law, I guess you would say. So she took the brunt of it. Now, she let's see here. Yeah, there was lots of stories about her doing that, and there was also, like I say, there was everybody remarks that she was in the room all the time with Campbell when the meetings happened. Oh yeah, here it is. Here it says an email to Alec Novella Lee in 2017. Michael Kurland, a Professor Moriarty series and Lord Dunsany and other series. He's a writer. Said that in 1970 or 71, Kay Tarrant said to a group of writers at lunch, quote, "Personally, I don't give a F expletive what you write, but we have teenagers who read the magazine." That's the full quote. And also there's a memo that's dated June 8th, 1951, that states from Miss Tarrant to Campbell, saying, "I never liked him," and the him is Frederick Pohl. "If you'll think back for a moment, you'll recall that I never chatted with him when he came in. a sixth sense always seemed to say, watch your step with this one. Why that's in a memo, I don't know. And there's no context around that. And this is in this here Astounding. I'm going, just as an aside, I'm going to do a discussion about this book because there are many faults with it. It's not as good as it appears. Now, she continued to run the magazine. She was editor throughout the changes from the selling of Street and Smith to Condé Nast in August 1959. The change to the name, or the slow change from Astounding to Analog. As you can see, the fading out of one to the other, and that's in 1960, until we get to Analog Science Fiction, and then also the change through the forced large size from early 1963 to 1965. She went through all that, apparently without missing a stride. But in 1961, either in late 1961 or early 1962, she suffered a heart attack, and there is a letter in the letters of John W. Campbell here to Raj Phillips Graham. It's dated January 10th, 1962. So I think it would have happened in 1961. If you sort of bear with me, I'll read the quote here. It's to Raj Phillips Graham. Dear Raj, first let me explain that part of the delay on the last letter was caused by the fact that Kay Tarrant, my assistant editor, secretary, managing editor, production editor, and everything else for the last 20 years, was hit by a heart attack and has been laid up. 5 of us are stumbling along trying to do what she did routinely, and we're coming out the worse for wear. So it was clear that she was very, very important for Campbell and the magazine, for him to say all that. And there's another little quote as well that but the Raj Phillips Graham, known mostly as Raj Phillips, wrote or lived from 1906 to 1966, and he wrote science fiction in the 40s and 60s, but he died in 1966, just as a background. In April 12th, 1953, a letter to John Arnold. It states, Dear John, I've asked Miss Tarrant to see that you get 25 reprints of the article. Miss Tarrant is the one member of our small staff at Astounding Science Fiction who can tread the intricacies of Street and Smith and get these done. You'll get them. So he definitely knew her abilities as well. And this is 1953 as well. And just as an aside, John Arnold is John E. Arnold, and I believe it is because in May, even though this letter is dated April, he had an article in the May issue, which is always done prior to it, and it was called Space, Time, and Education. As I say, she went through all the changes through that, and there's another reference in 1965 in these letters that have been published to a Joe Goodavage, and it's January 25th, 1965, and it says, Miss Tarrant had a bad attack, took her 6 months to get back to work. So they were without her for 6 months, and by the sounds of it, they were struggling. And I think it's Joseph F. Good. Avage was a journalist, lived from 1925 to 1989. He had interest in astrology and did a lengthy interview with Emmanuel Velikovsky. Now, in July 11th, 1971, John W. Campbell died suddenly. He'd been ill for quite a while, but this was like, there was no even a day. He just died watching TV in the evening at home. Now, Miss Tarrant, was in the office the next day, and she was writing letters to authors and so forth, letting them know what has happened to Campbell. And Isaac Asimov, in the memoirs, also said, in his memoirs, says that she kept the magazine going while they looked for another editor. And Campbell had left enough stories, like a backlog of stories, that kept the magazine going until December 1971. And with the assistance of the art director, Miss Tarrant, basically compiled the issues until 71. And Campbell also had a lot of unsent letters. So Miss Tarrant sent those letters as she would have normally, but she put a cover letter with them, and one of them notoriously was to John Haldeman, and with a rejection for a story that would eventually be The Forever War. And Street and Smith is sort of, without an editor or not Street and Smith, sorry. At this time, it's Condé Nast, are without an editor for Astounding, and they didn't really know the workings of it, so they asked Miss Tennant, Kay Tennant, to find, or at least put out feelers and ask to put forward people for the job. So she wrote letters to like Isaac Asimov, a whole bunch of authors and other publishers as well, who would be good for this. A lot of people were suggested, apparently, like Frederick Pohl wanted the job, but he knew that he probably couldn't get it, but he wanted it. Clifford Simak was rumored to have been a candidate, but he has always said no, he never was. He was never asked. But he may have been on a short list that never, got anywhere. But it was Ben Bova that was chosen to be editor. Now, Kay Tarrant stayed on until 1973 during the change. Some sources that I found says 1992, and I think that's based on, because in January 1972, she appears for the last time as sole assistant editor. In February, March, April, May, June, July, August, and on, she doesn't appear at all as assistant editor. Her name doesn't appear on the magazines. I was able to look at some scans online and looked at the table of contents pages. She disappears, but she does reappear in May 1973 with the name Diana King, and they both appear together until October, and then September, and I think October, Diana King is on her own. She's become the replacement for Kay. So at some point there, Kay Tarrant had left and retired, and Bova did work with her a little bit, and he said that she was a dedicated, selfless, tireless assistant. And apparently she never married, but she did have a cousin named Robert Tarrant, and I only know that because in one of the letters uh, here there is a reference to saying there's a Robert Tennant, her cousin. That's the only reference within the letters. Um, and she retired to her home in Hoboken, New Jersey, and she died March 1st, 1980. And as I say, she was 74 years old. So I don't know whether or not she was born in 1905 or 1906. Like she could have been born, before March 1st in 1906, and she would have been just turned 74, or she was 74 and she would have turned 75. I don't know because there's not enough information. And I think, like I say, it's pretty clear throughout. Like Campbell and everybody talked of her highly, except that they didn't like her apparent prudishness. But I kind of wonder, like, Asimov was visiting the offices quite regularly during the 39 1940 40 period, like pre-war period, like 38 even. He was visiting the offices quite often, so he would have probably spoke to Miss Tennant quite often. Now, I'm taking a leap here, and I've never seen anybody reference this, but I'm sure I can't be the only person who have thought this, that Susan Calvin is based on Miss Tennant, because every sort of physical description of Tennant matches Susan Calvin, and Isaac Asimov was even admitted that he did not know any women very often. He did not know women, and that's why, like, he didn't portray women that well. So who would have been the role model for Susan Calvin? Kay Tennant was there at the right time. He doesn't say this in his memoir, at least the 2 volumes. If he says in the later ones, I'm sure it would have been plastered somewhere on, like, there's a Susan Calvin Wikipedia page, and it doesn't say anything of who she was based on. But I really think it holds water that Susan Calvin was based on Catherine Tennant, the assistant editor for Astounding. But as I said at the beginning, there is hardly any information here about her, and it's like, I can't pull up anything online or in a book that has a good description of her life and her duties, like her job at Astounding / Analog. Well, I know what she did after, once she became sort of assistant editor to a certain extent, but how much impact did she have right from the get-go in 1938? And, like, was she hired as an editor, editorial assistant right from the beginning? What was her background? She might have had good background for this, because she was in her early 30s. This clearly would not have been her first job. She would have worked somewhere else, but what did she do? That's the question, and it's not. I can't find anything about that. And the other thing is that if it is hidden in some other book somewhere, I'm sure somebody would have prized that out and put it up online somewhere. And by a search of her name, it should come up. And I couldn't find anything. If anybody knows this and does find it through a search, do let me know, because I'd like to know myself, because I think she has been forgotten in many ways. So that's sort of the end of this, and it's a bit here all over the place at times, but there's not the whole history of her that is known is all over the place as well. But there's 2 more that I want to do. I want to do Celie Goldstein Lally, who was editor. She was actually editor. Let's put it this way. She was full editor of Amazing Stories for quite a while, and she revitalized Amazing Stories. But on the masthead or on the page and everything, people didn't think that she was they thought she was an assistant, basically. So I'd like to go through her. There's more. Thankfully, there's more information about her, and also Julie Lindell Ray, who worked in the background of Galaxy. I believe she was there when Goldstein was. H.L. Gold was still editor, and then she was definitely there with Frederick Pohl during his time. And then she moved on to other things. And again, there is more information about her. But still, I want to highlight these people's lives as they were for these science fiction magazines, and did revitalized the magazines or helped create the magazines what they are. And they've generally been forgotten that they've done this. And I'm sure there are lots of people that have been forgotten within these magazines that were helpful. These are ones that I've come across and I can see, and I realize that there's no information about them. And I'm sure there's, as I say, there's other ones, and there may even be less information about those, you know. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. And if you'd like to see more sort of spotlights on this, I'm definitely going to do the other two. But if you'd like to see more things like this, then do let me know in the comments or email me, and I'll see what I can do and see what I can find out, other little snippets that would be sort of specials about the magazines. Anyway, take care, BookTube, and thank you very much.